Okay, I think we are live. Welcome everyone. It is Sunday, February 28th. It's a glorious evening, and we have a fascinating group of individuals discussing this book called Biracial Britain. So without further ado, just to let you know a bit more about the book itself. It's divided into 3 chapters. It's a fascinating account of different individuals, but I'm going to ask our guests in due course to delve into a little bit further. So I'm going to start with some introductions. Our good friend Asan Akpan has joined us. He's a consultant geriatrician, as well as a visiting professor, as well as an honorary professor, with a keen role in research. So thank you, Asan, for joining this discussion.
Thank you.
Our next expert on the panel is Sana Khan, who's a surgical pharmacist who does a lot of educational work and has also a podcast herself called Primary Healthcare Development, and is also one of our new kind of members of the panel reviewing books. So thank you, Sana, for joining in.
Thank you.
And last but not least, the author himself. Thank you, Remy, for joining in this discussion. So I understand you're associate lecturer in the Department of Politics. Clearly, politics is very much key to your discourse and your focus, and you know, the list is endless in terms of what you've contributed in terms of Guardian, Foreign Policy, Washington Post, Al Jazeera, BBC, Sky News. So it's great to have you in this discussion, and it's great to actually have the author himself. So we'll certainly try to be as nice as possible.
Okay, I'm counting on that.
But a little bit about Med Talks Off the Shelf. So it's a book club that kind of covers a range of topics, primarily focusing on health and well-being, but you can't ignore kind of the societal inequalities as well when we discuss these books. So I happened to come along Asan's tweet, and then I just pestered him a little bit further, and before you knew it, we got this panel together. So we do this last Sunday of every month, so 8 till 9 p.m. And Sana will kindly introduce our next book for next month. So I'm going to start with yourself, Sana. What were your thoughts about the book itself?
Well, like I said a little while ago, this is the first ever sort of book that I've read on this topic, anything to do with race, because it's something that I think I've self-consciously had there's been a bit of stigma within about race for me, because like a lot of the people in the book, I have quite strong ties to the people in Pakistan where my mum and dad are from, but I'm very British in that my sense of humour is very dry. I love fish and chips. I have watched all of the fantastic things like Only Fools and Horses and all the British comedians. I love all that. So I don't know about the race sort of card. For me, it's quite highly stigmatized, but I didn't realize until I'd read the book. Like I said to Mehran a little while ago, I felt like it made me think so much about myself, more than the people. As I was seeing little bits of myself reflected in all the stories, which is really interesting. And I will probably end this little introduction with a question for Remy, in that at the end I would love some more book recommendations or articles if you have any at the end of it.
Okay, I'll think about that, definitely.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And Asan, how did you find the book as you went through it?
Well, I knew Remy was planning to release this book, and I must say I was really looking forward to it, because one of the things about being mixed race, I'm mixed race myself, is you sometimes don't come across people who have your sort of peculiar experiences, and not that it's negative, but you just want to bounce off, you know, and have a chat and a laugh about things, but it's difficult to have a laugh and bounce off with someone who hasn't had similar experiences. So I really enjoyed the book, because in some of the individuals they interviewed, I mean, there were just so many things, similar experiences that I've had. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. That's really cool. So it's just not me, right? People went through all this stuff. And as I said, it's not all negative. In fact, there were just some sort of positive things there, interesting things that had happened to other people that had happened to me. So I really, really enjoyed the book. And I wasn't disappointed at all. mean, as soon as it came down on my Kindle, I think my family couldn't get me to do anything else. I was just reading it all the time until I finished it. And as if you noticed, I was tweeting almost a quote from each chapter or so that I was reading. Just found it fascinating, really, really interesting.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It's so many diverse, experiences and ethnicities, and coming together, giving a kind of a voice to their life. Is really important for legacy, and important for actually meaning something when it comes to discussing things like race. Remy, what gave you the drive to do this book? And after you've released it, what kind of feedback have you received?
So starting from the last question, I've received very positive feedback from a wide range of people. Perhaps the sort of ones that have emotionally moved me most have been the ones coming from other mixed race people, who've read this, or who've, written me random emails simply from all over the UK saying, oh, I read your book, and, it was the first book I read in which really so much resonated with the kinds of experiences I have had, and sometimes this were people who aren't even of the same mix I am, so the black-white mix, but of, various other kinds of configurations. It might have been somebody who wrote me who had an English dad and Pakistani mom, and, wrote me a mail saying, oh, wow, a lot of the things I read there really resonated with me. So that sort of feedback definitely emotionally moved me the most. I've also gotten feedback from people who are not mixed race, who've also read it and said, for them, it's simply interesting to read about, what goes on in the minds of mixed race people, and how mixed race people think about race and identity. And so that's that. Going to what gave me the drive for it, I guess identity is something I've always sort of thought about on and off over the years. Growing up in Nigeria, I did think about it sometimes, but perhaps not so much. Honestly speaking, I mean, I was fully immersed in Nigerian culture. And of course, I did always know I was different and was seen as different, because even just, walking down the streets with my white Polish mom, sometimes kids would point at us and say the Nigerian equivalent of white person, which is Oyinbo in Nigerian pidgin. They say, oh, look, Oyinbo, basically. So, white people. And that was, targeted at me and my mom. And, it was not said in a malicious way. Like I said, these were often, little kids, just running, for them, we were simply exotic, you see. Like here, darker skinned people often feel they are seen as exotic. In Nigeria, I was seen as exotic, and my mom, definitely being white, was seen as exotic for her being white and me being of a lighter skin color. So I always did sort of have that sense of difference. I always felt a bit of an outsider, not all the time, not every single day. The way this identity thing works is you can go, weeks or months, perhaps, without remembering you are seen as somewhat of an outsider, but then somebody will say something, make a comment. Like I say, it might be something nasty, it might not even be, but somebody says something that draws attention to the fact that, oh, well, we actually see you as quite different from us, because you have a white mother. And so these were things that I'd thought about on and off. And so, but I had the good experience of growing up in a virtually all Black society, Nigeria, being light-skinned. And then after secondary school, so I went to primary and secondary school in Nigeria, then I moved to Poland, which was a diametrically different society from Nigeria, so a virtually all white society, where I was now seen as a Black person, basically. And there in Poland, the Polish eye is not as attuned to various sort of shades of races, let's call it, as is the British eye, which has been dealing with various sorts of people for decades. So when the Polish person looks at me, they don't see oh, this is a mixed race person. They see, oh, this is a Black person. So in Poland, I come across people as Black, and that's how I was treated. And I went through a lot of unpleasant experiences, especially when I came to Poland initially. Now things there are a little bit better. The society joined the EU and is a bit more open and is a bit more used to seeing people of Black and brown skin color, even though there's various problems now there because they happen to have a strongly right-wing government. But that's a whole different sort of issue. So in Poland, I started definitely to think about race and identity more, because of the fact that I was perceived very often primarily through that lens, and we tend to obviously focus on aspects of our lives that the world around us seems to focus on. So if people look at us and say, and talk a lot about our racial identity, then we also start to think about that quite more. If nobody brings it up to us, if nobody says, oh, Remy, oh, you're a Nigerian, how do people do things there in Nigeria? Or how do you people do things over there? Then, you don't think of those kinds of things. But when people bring up these issues, you also think about them. And so definitely in Poland, I started thinking about race and how this whole thing works a little bit more. And of course, when I now moved to the UK 6 years ago, the UK is the first multiracial society I've lived in. And and race is a big deal here. It's a debate. People talk about it all the time. People write about it in newspapers all the time. And I came just in the middle of the Brexit referendum campaign. So I came here January 2015. So this was just as the Brexit campaign was, or the referendum, sorry, was kicking off. And so, there also, talk came of xenophobia, from the Leave side, and race started being discussed very much here, and the debate intensified, I'd say. And then, of course, Trump won November 2016, and that just, the race debate sort of, really became polarized and really intensified in the Trump years. And then, of course, and so I started sort of pitching this book to publishers around towards the end of 2018. And 2019, I got my publishers who said, they'd be interested in publishing the book. And then I de facto started writing it really full time. And then, of course, 2020, George Floyd, horrible killing in the US. And then, so, the race debate just exploded. And so these were some of the events that, that led me to write the book. One thing which I find disheartening, I'd say, with the race debate here in the UK is that it can feel so polarized, especially on social media. When we meet people like this, like when I'm meeting you, and when you meet people of all skin shades, in real life and talk to them about it, it seems to be a much less negative conversation than what you come across on social media, where some people will tweet all sorts of things, just to rile up people, to stir up controversy, to provoke a reaction, and then there's a lot of negativity there. And that's not something which I feel comfortable in, and which I think can help anyone. And second point, just to end this round, is I noticed that when race is discussed here in Britain, it's usually discussed, one, in a top-down fashion. So in the sense of an author will write a book about their perspectives on the race issue. These are often very clever people, etc. But at the end of the day, it's the perspective of one person, of the author, of a single author. Very often, these are people who tend to come from London, work in media, high-profile people, and they will say, "Oh, look, this is how race works in Britain," and and they'll write a book about it. I wanted to be able to talk to regular people, so people who don't have any, ideological agendas, and people who are not trying to burnish any kind of, personal image. People who just tell, look, this is how it works in my own life. That's it. So I wanted to write a sort of bottom-up book mostly, and I also wanted to write something focused on the individual, because in the debates around race, what I notice is that they tend to get very abstract. There's this sociological concepts academics have come up with various sociological concepts, some of them useful, some of them perhaps less so, things like, white privilege, or white fragility, or they will say, oh, the Black community thinks this, or the Asian community thinks that. And, we're talking here, if we're talking about ethnic minorities in Britain, we're talking about over 10 million people, 15% of the population. That's about 10 million people, but these sweeping sort of terms are thrown out there. And I always used to wonder, okay, what do individuals really think? How does this really work on an everyday basis? Do these sociological concepts, which are just, thrown out there, do they really explain how people feel on an everyday basis, how the individual feels? Or not? I wanted to find out. I didn't sort of go in with any preconception that, oh, this definitely doesn't explain things, or this does explain things. So those are some of the issues I wanted to sort of bring out in the book, and which I hopefully was able to, that individual angle.
No, thank you, Remy. And you've touched on loads of topics there, which we're hoping to discuss later, especially what it means in terms of Brexit, as well as the current community. How do they respond to the topic of race itself? I'm going to try and focus a little bit about the book, and for me, there's lots of little snippets which made me chuckle about the Spanish kid Sammy, who was referred to as the black kid from Scotland. But I just wanted to try and go around the panel in terms of what bit did you find really heartwarming or appealing to yourself? So I'm going to start with Sana here.
Heartwarming, appealing. I think the most memorable one was Fiaz, the one with the Italian dad and the Indian mum. Was he from Bradford?
Pakistani mum from
Kashmir.
Kashmiri Pakistani.
So that's probably why, because I liked to see how his dad sort of transcended his race on purpose to sort of find the comfort in his faith, and it was really inspiring to me. But it still showed he sounded like his father, especially. There was a bit that was a bit broken off for the whole time. So maybe it's important to realize how important all the different facets of our personalities or our characters or whatever you can call it, ourselves are. So as long he was a Muslim and he had his family, and I think his whole story as an individual was beautiful. It was all full of love, really heartwarming, extremely brave, not moving just once but twice, disowning everyone he knew. But I think the thing of it for me was he's probably got loads of unresolved issues, and he's probably left a whole past behind. And you never know, what if those half Kashmiri, half Italian children, what if they went and sort of reconciled and everything was beautiful? And I think that sort of idea of not knowing, I think a lot of people, not just the mixed race individuals in the book, but everybody who's sort of left a space has probably just lost contact. I don't think it always happens as intentionally as his father, but just leaving behind a past. And a lot of our parents, I'm sure Maren and Asan will agree, our parents don't really talk much about their childhoods back home, so you just don't know how many stories you're going to uncover. So I think that was my favorite, because first of all, it was my hometown, and second of all, it was just so it was really heartwarming. But I think that one, you just want to go back to his father and get his whole story and like sort of delve into his heart a bit more.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there was a bit where he talks about, I think I wrote it down actually, nobody really understands where we fitted and tried to deal with confusion in their own way. Just kind of talks about that people are trying, and it doesn't mean that, sometimes we get it wrong, but I guess it's the fact that you have to still try with cultures and individuals less familiar to yourself. And trying to deal with some of the difficulties, because clearly he had some difficulties. But yeah, I agree. There's quite a fascinating chapter 13. Asan, if I move on to you, what did you find was the best bit or the best kind of message through the book?
Okay, I'll answer that maybe in two bits. Emotionally, I connected very much with those whose parents were from Africa and mom was European or something, because that sort of mirrors my own background, where my dad was Nigerian and my mom Polish. So I was very interested in reading about those experiences, even though those were experiences growing up here in Britain, which, as Remy explained, is different for someone like me who grew up in Nigeria. And then I came here. But it was interesting to see that a lot of the questions, sometimes when you're growing up as a teenager and you start questioning and wondering about the world and how you fit in, that those were some of the things that used to go through my mind. So that was cool, having that. The other thing that struck me about the book is that, of course, there was a varied experience. And the impression I got was that those individuals whose parents sort of sat them down and talked to them about race and basically said to them, this is going to come. And, and had a pep talk really with them. They seemed to be better prepared, more confident, more secure in dealing with challenges that came their way. So that was interesting. And in terms of interesting bits, well, there were many things. As I said, I did tweet a lot about some of my favorite quotes, and there are loads. I think there are over 10 or 12 of them. But maybe the one that I like most, because I'm always thinking positively, is that an identity is a story. A story we tell the world about who we are, and a story that the world tells us about who we are. I like that quote. I like that quote very much. Yeah.
No, thank you, Hassan. And Remy, I guess listening to all these stories where they're very unhinged must have been, I guess, difficult at times, but also a privilege. I don't know what your thoughts were through your journey.
Of course, I mean, it's a great privilege for people to tell you their stories, especially stories that take them to vulnerable places. Especially stories that take them to vulnerable places, and especially to speak frankly about race, you know. So a lot of people say we don't speak enough about race in Britain. I'm not so sure if it's a problem of us not speaking enough about race, or rather a problem of us not speaking honestly enough about race. And I tend to think rather the problem is in not speaking honestly enough about race. And that's because it has become such a politicized issue and such an ideologized issue that people, I think, are reluctant to say things that they are worried, you know, might not play well, you know, with a certain, you know, constituency, for instance, or a certain community, perhaps even their own community. And so it's difficult to get people to really speak honestly on the record publicly about how they feel, about how they may have had, you know, positive and negative experiences with this or that community, or even with their own community, you know. But that's the way real life really works, you know. Of course, there are issues of, you know, systemic racism and things like that, but also as human beings, we do know that we come across people from a variety of racial backgrounds who can be extremely kind to us and help us in life without expecting anything in return. And we will also come across people from a variety of racial backgrounds who can be extremely nasty to us, you know, and treat us very badly, without us having provoked any such treatment, you know. So in real life, the world is a very messy place. And it's not as neat as I would say some of the discussions, you know, portray to be, that, you know, there's a sort of groups you can identify as, you know, or the good people rather, and groups you can identify, oh no, bad people rather, you know. It doesn't really work like that in everyday life. But I think people sometimes might be reluctant to talk about some of these things. And so this was something which I really felt humbled and appreciated for, that people were really frank about these things, you know, and told stories which at times were contradictory, you know. So it might be a little bit good about community X, but also a little bit bad about community X, you know, and vice versa. But that's the way real life works, you know. Very often, you know, life is contradictory, the world is contradictory, you know. It's not that easy to fit neatly into one narrative and sort of give it like that. So that was something I particularly appreciated, you know, that people felt comfortable enough and trusted me enough to, you know, to say, look, this is how I think, yeah, and these are my experiences, you know.
Yeah, and I guess following on from that, there was certainly chapters which I found myself being quite difficult to read. Not I guess, and not in the content, but the kind of emotions it drives. And if I reflect the first couple of chapters when Rita and Eugene share their story, I guess there was a innate response for you to go and hug them, and whether it's to say that, you know, we're in this together, or to reassure, or say, I kind of understand where you're feeling, or perhaps it's even, I'm sorry you felt that way, or I'm sorry you experienced that. So I don't know whether, Sana, you felt that those were the kind of things that you found difficult, or whether there were other things that perhaps you found difficult to digest.
In terms of things that I found difficult to digest, it's something that is so stigmatized. As Remy said, race is quite a polarized topic, especially here. I think in Britain we don't deal with it well at all. On the surface, I think everyone tries to sort of behave in a way that feels socially acceptable. Then that means we don't tackle anything that's going on beneath the surface. And I think you mentioned that, Remy, when you moved over from Poland to the UK. And like you said, when the Brexit referendum happened and everything sort of exploded, it's just as if all of those below the surface sort of subconscious almost emotions and feelings and attitude towards a bunch of people, they were suddenly socially acceptable. So I think for me, I was quite surprised that, because the time scale is so wide, isn't it? It ranges from like the 40s right up until the 90s and the 2000s, and it just looked like they could have all happened in parallel on the same day. And that was something that was quite difficult for me, that it doesn't actually look like anything has changed, even though everybody either wants it to quite vehemently, or they've just accepted that this is the way life is. And I don't know which one is worse.
Yeah, no, that's certainly an interesting take on that side. Yeah, it doesn't feel that far long ago, does it? That those experiences are there. So clearly, it's still visceral in their mind. Hassan, what did you find difficult with this book?
I think what I found difficult with this book is that I know people have varied experiences, and obviously I read about how tough life was for some people. And they could have been any race. They could have been white. You know people have tough lives. So to read about how some people have struggled, and in fact some of them survived that. They came through that. But to see how hard it was interesting for me, because I thought, gosh, I was brought up in Nigeria and actually had a very comfortable life compared to what people were going through here. And that was hard. That was hard, because people have that sort of hard life, and they don't necessarily share that with you, even when they are having some horrible experience. So that was tough. And you do come across in real life people who, if you get to know them and you talk to them, they will share some of those things. So that was a hard bit. There were parts of that book that were hard because of that. And also, this is real experiences of real people. It's not fiction or made up.
And Remy, how did you reconcile the fact that there was lots of families disowning each other, lots of broken families, lots of isolation, mental health difficulties, abuse, where you suspect that the home should be the safest place on earth was no longer the safest place? How, what were the conversations off record, and how do you kind of support those individuals who've shared their experience for this book?
It's difficult, and you mentioned that the individuals who seem to have come out best, those Hassan mentioned, those who got a pep talk from their parents earlier on. One thing which I agree with that. One thing which also struck me is that at the end of the day, what is really most important in a person's, I'd argue, even adult life, is that they received unconditional love at home in their childhood, during their childhood. And the fear story, which Sana talked about, for me was a perfect sort of example of this. So this was his Italian father was disowned by his Italian family because he had married a woman, a Pakistani woman. His Pakistani mom's family didn't disown her, but were clearly unhappy at her having married an Italian man. And as he said, growing up in Bradford in the 70s and early 80s, no one wanted to own them. But he said, what kept me going was the love we had as a tight family unit. And he talked about how he remembers even when they were staying in one room, with the four of them plus the parents, how they'd be, sitting on the bed at night, and he'd watch his mom knitting and his sister, his mom and his sister, I think, knitting. And he said, and he remember falling asleep and how, warm he felt, And when I met him, when we spoke, I think he's clearly in a good place in his life. I mean, this was a guy who, I mean, I know, of course, sometimes it can be difficult to tell, but I mean, he seemed like a very happy person. If I were to take my read of him, was that he's a very happy person. And so I think that love which he got, was able to sustain him through all those bad experiences. And so if you have that, it's really difficult for the world to bring you down. But if you don't have that, unconditional love as a child from your parents, then it's actually very easy for the world to bring you down, And then even things which might not affect others, when people say to you, you feel bad because that esteem is not there, So my experience has been that, that esteem, it's formed in those, and I'm sure you people as medical professionals definitely would have, I'm sure, have come to this. That esteem, it's formed at a very early stage in life. And, if the child has that unconditional love, then they're a much stronger adult, Whereas if that wasn't there, then there will be problems later on in life, In this case, this could be problems stemming from their racial background. But, you'll have people who are, all white or all black or all black and living, let's say, in an African state. So they're not facing any racial challenges. But if also they didn't receive unconditional love as a child, as an adult, that person would probably have issues. So this is something that is key. And this is something which I think we can't emphasize enough to parents, to young parents today, bringing up little children, that your child must feel secure in your unconditional love. And I emphasize unconditional because very often, I think, or too often, parents perhaps this is going a bit too far, but I think too often, a child can feel that the love sometimes can be conditional, that if I do well in school, then my dad will be proud of me, and and then my dad will love me, but if I don't do well in school, then I'll feel that he's not too proud of me. He thinks, that's not what my son should be doing well in school. My daughter should be doing well in school, or things like that. So that's why I emphasize the unconditionality of it, because it's really that part I think is important. So that's to answer you. So that's on that issue. And then if we're talking about how people who do have mental health challenges connected with their identity, I think we would have to approach that problem in the way we'd approach people who have any sort of mental health issues connected with anything, be it identity or anything else. So the first thing is, of course, for them to be able to talk to people. So I sensed from a lot of people I was speaking to, they told me, not just that I sensed, after the interview, they'd say, oh, Remy, that's the first time I've actually really talked about this stuff like this in this kind of length or in this kind of depth. I've actually never really talked about it. Yes, I've mentioned this or that bit, to my parents or to my brothers or sisters or friends, but I never actually really sat down and talked about it. And after sitting down and really talking about it, I actually feel quite better, So just talking about it helps people, So if people come into spaces, if you're talking mixed race people, if people come into spaces where there are other mixed race people who have similar experiences, like Hassan spoke, that it is such a human need to meet people who have experienced similar things you've experienced. Because very often we feel things, we don't really know why we feel. We can feel sad at moments, and we don't really know why we feel sad at that particular moment. Or we can feel happy at particular moments, and we don't really know why we feel happy at that particular moment. But it's usually because of the experiences we have, stemming from ranging from childhood to adulthood. And so that connection of experiences, being able to meet someone who's experienced the same things with you and can even tell you that, I also feel sad when I think about this, just like you do. Or I feel also happy when I talk about this, just like you. That helps you explain you to yourself, if that makes sense. And so this is why, people meeting in communities, is vastly important, and why clearly you can see people have the need for it, to meet up with people with who they can share similar experiences with it. It's a basic human need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's so much to talk about that, isn't there? It's just when I kind of reflect on race, and when I was challenged in terms of my own kind of race and understanding, I think about university when all these kind of conversations come to the fore, and but reading everyone's accounts, it seems to be their kind of journey of discovery of who they are. and sometimes the answers are given to them, sometimes they have to really struggle to find them. But if I come to you, Sana, what do you identify yourself as, and did you find yourself it being quite a straightforward answer?
I think the very basic answer is I'm just a British Muslim, but I struggled with this question a lot. I think I've written a whole paragraph on it, but very basically, when I was a lot younger, I think I was quite assertive about identifying as purely British because of my upbringing, because of the books I'd read, because of the career path I'm following, all that sort of thing. I love the NHS. I think that's a very British institution. I worked for the NHS for years, and the company I work for now is very British sort of thing. So for a long time, I was quite assertive of, oh, I can't just put British on the ethnicity or the nationality or something like that. I can't just tick that and that's going to be it. But recently, I think also because growing up as I had quite a sheltered upbringing as a typical sort of Muslim Pakistani girl would have. So I think I was very softly rebellious. So that was my sort of rebellion, that I didn't want to tick Pakistani on my sort of on the ethnicity sort of box. But very recently, I think you get more into the music and the culture and the food and the dressing, and obviously I love the Pakistani cultures that we've got. The South Indian sort of the family dynamic is so beautiful, and it's something that I'm really grateful for. And all of those beautiful things about our cultures, we've never been apart from. So I think the end of the answer is just I am a British Pakistani Muslim, but it's taken a long time to get to that. And I think it's the book that's actually made me think about how much I've actually struggled with it. Before that, I think it was more of an unnamed struggle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Sana. And that's when a child comes to you and asks, who are we? What would you say to that?
Well, my kids don't ask me who they are. They say they are British. They are not confused at all. My wife is Spanish, but they were all born here. So in terms of confusion, there is no, I wouldn't say they're confused. They identify fully as British. They brought up here, their friends are that way. But obviously they know of my background. We talk about it a lot, and they enjoy listening to the stories and everything. But going back to Shana, I would say when I was growing up in Nigeria, I just felt totally immersed in Nigerian culture. I didn't even used to think, I know what Remy says, and that's true. People will always identify, you'll be made to feel, yes, you're different. But there are many times when I just wasn't aware, and I just felt immersed in the Nigerian culture, and I identified as Nigerian. I didn't even mention the other bit, the Polish bit. There didn't seem to be any need. And then there are lots of things to talk about Nigeria if you want to do politics and all that, but I moved for socioeconomic reasons, and I'm here now. And I like the orderliness. I like the efficiency. Let's forget about the present government. But, I like the efficiency, the orderliness, the timeliness. That in my mind, that's how I operate. I've always operated that way. And I like the security. I like that everything, everything works as it should. There is, orderliness, security, and all that. And this is where I'm happy to be. I'm happy to raise my family here. I'm happy to live here. And I like that British culture where you're a bit understated. You don't overdo things. I was a year in America, and every single person you met was a top world expert on something. And I thought, geez, because they'll ask me, what do you do? And I'll sort of be a bit modest about it. And then I would know that this person actually hasn't done as much work in that area as me, but he's the world expert. How come? How did he become the world expert? So that understatedness, that sort of, I just like all that stuff. So I'm quite happy identifying as British, but I have no problems. Like today, you can see I'm wearing one of my Nigerian traditional dresses. So I like sharing that. I like that being obvious. And if people ask me stuff, I'll talk about it. And I never, try to deny that bit of me, because to me, that's all very interesting. And it's the same when I meet people. And as soon as they tell me that they are from this part of the world or all that, I really like to hear more, because I like that a lot. And I feel that because I've got this sort of almost like diverse global view, I think it has helped inform how I do things, even in the clinical world, the way I listen, the way I make decisions. I feel it has helped me a lot in having a very open mind. And I just find it all very positive. But as I said, people have had horrible experiences too. But I cannot say that I've had horrible experiences. For me, it's been mainly all good, positive.
And it's difficult to try and understand why that's the case, isn't it? Sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's who knows. It's very difficult to argue that I was like this, hence I had this kind of outcome. But I do agree. I think having a kind of diverse background and obviously in your home itself, it's multicultural in that sense. That always helps an individual or a family understand, accept, and because ultimately that's what we're trying to do. But that's if you're from that perspective and have that right ideology. If it's around power and domination, then obviously you will pick and choose and try to see who you can dominate and control, because that's in essence that's what prejudice is, isn't it? It's a means of domination. So it's really interesting. So I guess, Remy, when that question, as I was asking that question, I was trying to think of the answer myself, because I class myself as British. I'm actually not sure if my family would be very happy with that, but nevertheless, I'd class myself as British, but I clearly have influences from India, Saudi Arabia, Iran. So clearly a very kind of multicultural influence, especially when you come to our house and what's prepared from mum, etc. Obviously restricted at the moment because of COVID, but that just kind of gives a bit of a flavor. But is race important? Because there is an argument to say it's a social construct. So should we be embracing a social construct? And does it cause more problems than good?
I think if we look through history, if we go back hundreds of years, and let's say past 500 years, then as summa summarum, as they say, sort of as a totality, race has probably had more negative consequences, or the social construct of race, not probably, has definitely had more negative consequences than positive consequences. I think that's, I'd feel strongly definitely arguing that point. Like I say, if we look, past 500 years, yes, it is a social construct, like I think virtually most of the things we operate our world on are. And I write in the book that, ultimately, I don't think emphasizing race as a social construct is going to make it any less relevant to people. Just like, some might emphasize, some people might say that religion is a social construct. That doesn't mean it's going to make it any less important to people who are religious or people who have faith. And so what ultimately matters to people is what people believe matters. And clearly, many people do believe that racial identities matter, just like they believe ethnic identities matter. Now, just to diverge a little bit, but it's still sort of on the point. When the African states gained independence in the 1960s, there was a huge wave of, intellectual thought and cultural thought saying that for the African nation to emerge, the tribe must die. So because, colonialism essentially forced together thousands of previously autonomous communities in Africa into these 54 nation states we have today. So it forced together different ethnic groups, people who spoke different languages, had different traditions, different cultures, etc. And so, for instance, in Nigeria alone, there's over 250 different ethnic groups. And so a lot of African thinkers, when the colonialists left, they said, look, for us to be able to build nations out of these diversities, we have to essentially kill off ethnic identities, because we want people to be loyal to the whole nation, not just to their ethnic group. Now, that makes a lot of sense. And a lot of people were actually predicting that these ethnic groups, these ethnic identities would die. But the thing is, they didn't. So 60 years on, people's ethnic affiliations within African states still matter to them. you know, even though a lot of work and effort has gone into making them not matter, you know, to them, but it matters to them. And so that's a lesson I think we need to take about how, you know, humanity works and how the human mind works. And I'd say it's similar with racial identities. I don't think a lot of people, you know, wake up in the morning. I don't think the average white person wakes up in the morning and thinks, what's the most important thing to me in my life? Yeah, the fact that I'm white. I don't think so. I don't think the average black person wakes up in the morning and thinks, oh, what's the most important thing to me? The fact that I'm black. No. But at some level, it does somehow matter to people. Generally, people do have that need to feel, you know, an affiliation to some kind of in-group, you know. So a Hope Not Hate survey, a survey conducted by the Institute Hope Not Hate 2020, showed that 82% of ethnic minorities in Britain say and this is the quote, my race, ethnic identity is important to who I am. Okay, so this means it matters to people. And I think in the British context, it actually matters more to those of us who are called ethnic minorities here, because we're minorities here, than it actually does to white people, actually. And that's because of that minority factor. And now this is a general trend among minorities in all across various different continents and cultures of the world, whether it's in the Middle East, whether we're talking about the Sunnis in Iraq, or the Alawites in Syria, or other minority groups in various continents. There's a tendency, social research has shown this, this is not just my idea, there's a tendency for the minority groups in those societies to hold on strongly to their ethnic identities. It means something to them. They don't want to be fully, whereas the majority groups tend to prefer a nationalist ideology, tend to prefer a nationalism, so to say. So just to give an example, the Shiites in Iraq will tend to favor an Iraqi national identity, you know, being the main identity. Whereas the minority group, the Sunnis, will tend to, their Sunni identity will tend to mean a lot. So this is a general trend. So I'm not surprised that in Britain, actually, ethnic minorities here say their racial identity is important to them at a higher rate than white people actually say it, you know. So that's there's something there with also minority psychology. So it's important. So I think what really matters at the end of the day is, what do we understand these racial identities to really mean? It's not the fact that they're just there. So the fact that one person says I'm black and another person says I'm white wouldn't have any social significance whatsoever if an overwhelming majority of white people had positive opinions about black people in general, and vice versa. Okay? And if an overwhelming majority of black people had positive opinions about white people, then actually that race wouldn't mean anything, you know. But what really matters is, what do people think you having black skin color says about you as a person? What do people think you having white skin color says about you as a person? That's where we really get into the nitty-gritty of why race matters. So it's the assumptions people hold of, oh, that guy is black, so he's probably this kind of person. Or, oh, that lady is white, so she's probably that kind of person. It is these assumptions which we make about people of other racial groups that really make race matter. If not, it wouldn't matter at all. Or if all the assumptions were positive, then it wouldn't matter. Okay, because I'd see a white person, I have a positive opinion about white people, I'd say, oh, great, a white guy. And a white person would see me and he has a positive opinion about people who look like me, and he'd say, oh, great, that's a brown guy or that's a black guy, and there'd be no problem. So everything boils down to these assumptions which we make. So the key, I would say, is in trying to reimagine these social constructs and really try and drum it as much as possible into people's heads that, look, someone's skin color really tells you nothing about them. It tells you nothing about them, you know, aside from a few bare-boned facts. Like perhaps you might see someone and say, oh, okay, that person is a Muslim because of the way they dress and perhaps the way they look. But that's all it tells you. It tells you nothing about the character of the person, you know. And so you can look like me and be the nicest person in the world, or you can look like me and be the worst person in the world, you know. And this is, I think, the direction, you know, we have to go. So it's really about breaking down those sort of prejudices and those sort of assumptions people make. And this is not easy because, you know, every day, just to survive, we make hundreds of thousands of decisions. And you know, people who study how cognitive how people how the cognitive facilities work show that we often make snap decisions because we have to, because we can't think through every single decision which we have to make every day because there's hundreds of them. So we just look and say, ah, boom, okay, that kind of person, oh, that's okay, that's that. Oh, this, oh, okay, no, this is bad, this is good, and we move on. That's the only way we can live. So it's not easy. It's not easy, really, because people just look and, you know, they sort of almost need to make that snap decision. But we have no choice but to try and make people more conscious of this fact that, look, you might make certain assumptions looking at people on a completely false basis, or because you met one Black person somewhere who treated you bad, then you think, you know, all Black people are unpleasant or not good, or you met one white person somewhere who was nasty to you, and then you've now made the assumption that, oh, all white people, you know, that's how they are, they're all racist. You know, it doesn't work like that. So the only thing we can do, as I would say, not try and render racial identities irrelevant, but try and show people how little they tell us about the character of people or of a person.
Just listening to that, and also one of the books that we had done previously by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me, he talks about race being not the child, but the father of racism. But at the same time, if you think about what Martin Luther King talked about, it's not about being colorblind. It's about your character, not the color of your skin. So there's, it just certainly feels we've been having this conversation a lot over the decades. Obviously, we're doing this for the first few moments, but at the same time, take a very kind of overarching view. There is, to some degree, there is some progress. And I generally thought that when we think about Meghan Markle, for example, as well as Barack Obama, I'm going to come to you, Sana. How do you think the British public kind of responded and how she was perceived as time went on?
Meghan Markle, I think the fact that she's sort of escaped our media completely, like physically escaped our media community, has sort of spoken for itself. But I remember because when all of her sort of media problems were being exposed, it was the journalists made it very clear for us. We were quite lucky. We could see the comparisons between certain types of newspapers versus more unbiased sort of views, and it was just so shocking to see how maybe my eye, or maybe a lot of our eyes, didn't see it when it was not contrasted so starkly, but she was treated explicitly differently to other royals and other young women, and it was just the focus on every single thing that she did was just so negative. It just didn't make any sense. And to me, honestly, I completely forgot that she was mixed race or anything like that. I just remembered her as Rachel from Suits, and I know that a lot of younger people did that. But once I've spoken to I think it's more of the older generation and the people who are not so integrated into multiracial, multicultural communities, they see her skin color as a problem for some strange reason. As Remy said, in London, it's a humongously melting pot of different cultures, different colors, and I think she's if we're going to give the importance to her skin color, I think she's a beautiful symbol of how Britain should be moving forward. And I think the fact that she's crossed a whole ocean to be away from the media because of her skin color, that's what people are focused on, not the fact that she's so intelligent, she's so resilient, she's a great role model to all of us young British women. She's run so many businesses, she's been through almost exactly the same comparisons that we've seen in Remy's book. She's been through those, and she's also been very vocal about them. She could have been one of the most important people in our future, but they've held on so much to the past in these very racist articles and journals and newspapers that we've just lost that opportunity. And I hope we haven't, because she's still young and we've still got a long way to go. But I think she was a lost opportunity in terms of getting us together and unifying us as a people.
Yeah, and it certainly reminds me of the negative effects of groupthink. How it all started, it was very positive, very inclusive, very diverse. You know, how so many people watched the marriage and were full of hope, and then people had to make a choice whether it's Meghan or the Queen, and for whatever reason they made their choice. Maybe not as simple as that, but certainly, you know, that's one of the questions that they had to answer. We're getting a few more questions, Asa, and I'm going to ask you about genetics and race and healthcare. Is there any value? And I know that there are some kind of social thinkers are trying to convince others that the degree of intelligence is also influenced by race, which I clearly disagree with.
So I disagree with that. In fact, one of the things that's changing now in the medical field, again, mainly on medical Twitter, which is good that I've seen, there are a group of Black nephrologists that are trying to get the nephrology world not to calculate creatinine clearance and other things based on race. They say you should do it biologically. That someone's race has nothing to do with their creatinine clearance. And actually that Black people may have been harmed because of that amendments, that there is really no scientific evidence for that. And I must say that as a medical student, I that's how I was taught, you know, and I assumed that was correct. But obviously now I've read the papers and I can see that actually, well, that there isn't any point in that. We know that a lot of the reasons why we're unwell is not to do with our genetic makeup, it's more to do with our the determinants of health and well-being. And whichever race you are, you know, you're going to face some housing problems, educational problems, where you're brought up, the things that you're exposed to. We tend to live in the same area. So if you're in an affluent area or in a deprived area, you're going to find people from all different races there. And the reason that they then become sick is nothing to do with their genetics. There is genetics play a bit, but not a major role. It's more those determinants of health and well-being that affects everyone living in that area, irrespective of your race. So that's coming in, and hopefully that will change. One other thing I just wanted to mention quickly is that I think what we're seeing is this pushback that has happened with Meghan Markle, the way Barack Obama was treated. And I think these are all last gasp attempts, because what's going to happen is inevitable. As Remy said in his book, people of mixed races are going to be the majority in this world with time, because people are mixing more, people are integrating more, and we are going to be in the majority, really. And this is just sort of, to me, a last gasp attempt of people who believe in some monoraciality, which in this modern world is not going to happen. We're just mixing more and more. So it is uncomfortable during this transitional phase, but I only see it as a transitional phase, and things will get better.
Thank you for that. And Remy, just, I guess, any kind of final comments about the book, and certainly Sana also asked about whether you could share any good bedtime reading, or certainly some books for us to learn a bit more. I don't know what you'd have to say to that.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I should have been thinking about that should have been thinking about that. Who did I? Let's see. So those would be books specifically on a similar issue, so on issue of race identity, or just generally good books?
Well, both. But where do you find the inspiration in terms of writing, especially on the topic?
I'm just trying to think now.
Should I give you a moment whilst I ask Sana to introduce our next book?
Yes, exactly. Let me think.
Yeah.
Right, well, I've got my pen and my tablet ready for your answer.
Yes.
Introduce next month's book, did you say, Myron? Right.
Yeah, please.
So next month we are going to be discussing the Etymologicon by Mark Forsyth. He's a linguist and he's an etymologist, so he's in his introduction, as he says, he's obsessed with the origin of words, and the book reads beautifully like a chain of words that relate in terms of where they come from, where they're going in the future, how we use them in our language at the moment, and it just made me understand the world in such a more unified way, that everything's connected, and it was just such a beautiful sort of outlook on the world that I got after reading this book. So yeah, join us next month. What was that, the 28th, I think?
Yeah, 28th of March, 8 to 9 p.m. So same time next month. Go on, Remy. You seem
Yeah,
very
Sorry,
quick.
I found. So you mentioned Ta-Nehisi Coates. Obviously, is a good writer on racial issues here in Britain. I think I found Afua Hirsch's British quite interesting, and also Akala's book on, I think it was called Natives.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Fantastic.
those are books definitely which I remember from which stuck in my mind definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And yeah, I just want to thank all three of you as well as our audience. They've been patiently waiting, and I do want to apologize. We haven't been able to go through all your questions for the panel, but it is time limited and there's so much to talk about this book. But I just want to thank again both Sana, Asan, and Remy for their expertise and reflections on the book. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you all.
All right, good.
Bye.
Bye-bye.